let's talk about this piece of how, in heaven's name, do we make culture feel a bit more than the fluffy stuff? I've literally this morning just been in a conversation with a HR director who is facing into halfway through their culture programme and facing into working with a new chief executive, and we've been strategizing a bit on how do you get this person to understand what we're trying to do around culture and get them on board while they think about the type and tone of their own leadership, but also we were having a conversation about I think the really common challenge that you get in this area, where when we're talking about culture, we're thinking about performance drivers, behaviours that are going to support the business to succeed, etc., alignment of behaviour, and how do we set up a system where people can thrive and therefore deliver what's required. But I think often, even when we're using the same words as our stakeholders, it's really easy for them to think that to use their old schemas and assumptions around things and still default back to that disappointing bit of, oh, well, we just need to do a pulse survey, or we just need to show people that we're listening to them, and we'll do the you said we did thing, or whatever it is. So there's a real risk that what happens is that we will we get to a place where we almost think that we're influencing someone, but their predisposition is that culture is this thing that's about making people happy and trying to get them to a place of just being eternally satisfied. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we break through and start to use language and stories, etc., to connect people to other places. Why should you pay attention to me on this stuff? Well, look, it's up to you. Listen to what I say and then decide if it's helpful or not. That's the best thing to do, really. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Paula Brockwell. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist, and I've been working in culture change for more years than I like to mention these days. I've started just saying 20 plus because I don't actually want to admit how many it really is on these things. And I work with lots of different organisations, but typically not in that sunshine and rainbows place of how do we get businesses to build self-actualizing and self-managing teams, etc. Much more with organisations where perhaps there's been a period of misalignment or change, etc., which is about harnessing cultures to be able to move them forward and drive performance in a meaningful way. So what we're going to focus on in this session today is 3 core things, really, and I find that these are the ones that really make a difference to people, hence why I thought I'd talk to you about them today. We're going to have a conversation about how you make this stuff tangible. What does that look like? How do we do that? And how do we really get people to connect to this? So it's not just using those high level statements of it's how people feel on a Sunday night about a Monday morning, or the way that we do things around here. While those are useful starting points to get people to connect to stuff, being able to link it more broadly to business context and need is helpful. So we'll explore that. We'll talk a bit more broadly about how you make this relatable as well. I think one of the things that we see, particularly with those who talk about culture being fluffy, is those who are a bit insulated actually from the day-to-day experience. So I'm sure you all have experienced that kind of perceptual mismatch where you take some surveys or listening data into an executive team and they kind of go, sorry, what? It's like, what round here? No, it's not like that. It's like this. But what those people often really miss is the fact that they come from a very different perceptual frame of reference than people who are having everyday experiences within the organisation. They have a greater sense of control. There's a greater sense of curation of their experience because people want to keep them happy on things. And also, they've got a lot more skill and experience around things often, and a bit more self-confidence because they've been, they're the type of individual who has managed to back themselves or promote themselves to get to that position. So they don't necessarily consciously connect with what other people are experiencing. So let's talk a bit about that. And we'll also talk about this idea around making it clear. So one of the big things that we see with culture is how the action plans ultimately can be quite woolly. It's about broad intentions and commitments about driving behaviour forward rather than kind of very tangible systemic changes and actions. So we'll talk to you a bit about how you can really bring, well, I get that this needs to change, but how does it need to change and what do we need to do to make it different? We'll talk a bit about how you do that in a meaningful way. Okay, so let's talk first of all about this idea of making it tangible. So this first area, I just wanted to share these. I did a quick Google on what is culture, and I genuinely did not curate this to any significant level other than pick the ones that looked easiest to read out of the top 10 images that I found when I did the Google search on this. And you can see how we've tried, I think, as an industry and as professionals to try and create a sense of what culture is. But all of it is the stuff that we all say on and on and on and over and over and over. And actually, often what it does is default to this piece around culture being the thing that whether people are happy or not at work. And I think a lot of senior leaders in particular see culture, even see engagement as that thing where, you know, employees are moaning about this and we need to kind of just make them feel a bit more happy and satisfied, which leads to a term that I've recently just come across. I think I invented it, but you never know because other people have said it, but the idea of fun washing, really. So we end up doing some little things that are about positive emotional bumps where we're just trying to make people feel a little bit happier and a little bit more satisfied in the short term, without truly considering how we build their experience in a more meaningful way longer term. So how do we really support people to be able to connect with an overall experience within work when they're doing their day job that allows them to feel happy, healthy and connected? So the happiness is there, that energy piece is there, that connection piece is there, but helping business leaders really connect to this idea that culture is about how we run our business and how in running our business we make people feel about their work. So if I feel like I'm set up to succeed and back to succeed and being given the resources and support that I need to succeed, I can probably take on the world. If I feel like I'm working in a creaky system where the printer doesn't work, the tech takes me 40 minutes to take on a new customer query, my manager doesn't really listen to me whenever I talk about systemic barriers that perhaps if they just had a conversation with some other teams and worked through, they could influence. If that's my day-to-day lived experience, it doesn't matter how many cupcakes or how many values launches we do or how many times we get ice cream vans round or fuddles happening, that it won't make a difference in terms of my ultimate satisfaction at work. And in fact, it might make me feel a bit peed off that we can afford to spend money on that, but we can't just fix the printer, or we can't just drive our hybrid policy on a way that is more needs centric rather than just, oh, let's pick a model that makes the leaders feel a little bit safer and drive it through and see what happens. So this piece around ensuring that we're not just talking about are we trying to make people happy, but are we trying to make them feel resourced and enabled? If that's what our goal is, then we're starting to shift the conversation. So it's not about sunshine and rainbows. It's not about making it cozy and easy for people. It's much more than that. So first, that orientation piece I think is important. And I'm going to share with you a graphic in a minute around how you can play with that and share that story. So what is culture really? Well, honestly, for me, culture is this really funny kind of the reason that it feels so difficult to describe in a concrete way is it's this real related reinforcing system that just kind of keeps working on itself. So the thing with culture is it's a bit like the inputs of what creates your culture are also the outputs. And what I mean by that is how I behave on a day-to-day basis is absolutely influenced by the culture within my organisation, but also how I behave and what the beliefs I have about what's right for me to do around here, what's acceptable, and what I will or won't get away with, or what I'll get praised for. So our behaviour is absolutely influenced by the soup that we're sitting in, but we are not active bystanders in that. Every time I take cues from that thing and then I behave, I am feeding those cues into the system for other people and for myself because I'm getting feedback about whether that's acceptable or not. So we're caught in this cycle of not being able to say what we need to shift. So to change behaviour, we need to change behaviour. To change systems and processes, then we need to shift people's mindsets around things, etc. If we want to shift attitudes, then we need to shift the behaviour that's driven by those attitudes to make those shifts. So it's this really kind of difficult thing to influence. The analogy that I often use with with leaders on this is talking about it almost being like a soup on a boil. So the ingredients are in there and they will just keep heating off each other and releasing into the soup more and more over time. And if we don't consciously try and break the cycle, introduce new flavors, check what's going on and make sure that we're keeping it at a concentration that feels right for us, then we kind of overboil it and it creates something that's unhelpful for us. So culture change is less about I do this and I get that. It's more about adding a bit of seasoning into a soup and saying, well, has that changed the flavour a bit, or do I need to do add more carrots or whatever it may be. We need to think about a variety of different smaller shifts that allow us to drive things forward. So if that's what it is, it's that complexity piece of it's about culture is truly that's the tone for the way in which your business really works. It is the thing that sets the norms and sets the rules for the resourcing model that we choose when we're doing budgeting. Are we the type of culture are we the type of organisation that goes fast and lean? So we commit to a really small staffing budget whenever we've got a really high set of deliverables, etc. And that stuff influences the behaviours that people choose day by day and the ones that they think are acceptable, the decisions that they make, and also the trade-offs that they accept when people are watching as much as they aren't watching. And it really gets ingrained then into the systems and signals and stories that build around people. So if our decision-making processes and our own behaviour influences what tech we put in, the size and shape of our teams, etc. It is as much about how our business is built and what is supporting it from an infrastructure point of view as it is how people are behaving on a day-by-day basis. So how I try and explain this probably in a more helpful and logical way is trying to push people past this idea of everyday experience. It's a helpful measure, but it's not the single endpoint. If we truly want culture to be seen as a pragmatic and useful business driver moving forward, we've got to understand that that piece, that everyday experience, is not just about happiness, but it's creating those beliefs about how it's acceptable to be around here, my behaviour, my decisions and my actions on a day-by-day basis. So that everyday experience creates a set of attitudes and ultimately behaviour, which ultimately influences the business results that we can get. And I suppose to make that really pragmatic, an example I would give is it's whether if you're working in a retail space, it's whether your shop assistant thinks it's perfectly acceptable to sit on their phone just scrolling when someone walks into the shop, or whether they get up, greet that person, make them feel safe and warm, help them with whatever challenges they have, and then make sure that through that experience they create a higher likelihood of a sale. So it has a direct influence on bottom line and a direct influence on people's experience, or what the business gets in terms of results that come through. So some of that might be about motivation and does this person care enough, but it's also coming down to those elements of behavioural norms, rules and priorities and what it's acceptable to do around here. And I think that often that conversation of behavioural norms, what is acceptable and what isn't, what is tolerated and what isn't, is a much more helpful conversation to have with our executives than are our people feeling happy and well enough to do things, because typically those beasts don't feel that. They've got different support systems, infrastructure, levels of energy and resilience that has led to them, and different pressures as well, that's led them to the position that they're in. So that the message of well-being and energy is not one that they often connect with, or if they do, they start to personalize it. They kind of do some fundamental attribution bias that says, well, that's because those people aren't resilient enough, or they don't really understand what it takes. If we focus more on this question of, are we getting the behaviours that we need to drive business success? And if we aren't, how do we start to influence our culture to unlock and enable the behaviours that we need moving forward? Then suddenly we're changing the game and the kind of framing of the problem to make it feel really relevant to the business context. Right, I got excited there. I'm going to check with you if you've got any questions, queries, comments. I'd love to hear from you. What's your thoughts in terms of what I've described there?
I think it's about getting the story across, isn't it? Making sure that the senior leadership team really understand the storytelling behind it. For me, it's about how we get our people to do their best work. And that's exactly what you're talking about by the sound of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, Vicky. For me, I think there's this piece around acknowledging that each set of facts or situation can have slightly different lenses on the story, and different groups will take a different story on this. So here, I guess we're thinking very particularly about this bit around how do we meet the business need by harnessing the behaviour that, you know, our organisational environment in a way that allows us to unlock the behaviour that we need. And that's the story that I certainly find works most effectively with executives. And I don't mean it's because they don't care, it's just because their business, you know, they're the top 3 to 5 things that are in their brain are business performance related, because that's what they're KPI'd, rewarded, etc. And that's where the pressure is for them. So as much as they may, from a heart point of view, connect to the story of well-being and energy, from a day-to-day priority point of view, it's much more about performance, and being able to anchor it to that conversation, I certainly find is a real unlocker with things. Oh, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that's helpful reflection. So Sarah's just saying that that you can get stuck in that kind of in that position of culture feeling like the fluffy stuff, and that repositioning of it as performance can be really helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Great. Okay, so you can see here that all we're doing is shifting the lens. And you know, if I was talking to colleagues about this, and I wanted, if this masterclass was more about how do we get colleagues on board, I'd be focusing less on the business performance piece. I'd be focusing much more on one of the core messages we use a lot, or one of the core stories that we build a lot with those groups is more about how do we make work feel and flow better. So this idea of, yes, it feeling better, but also driving that sense of ease of doing what's required. So building efficiency and enablement into the messaging around that. So for us, the performance element of culture is critical if you ever want it to live in your business, and you want to also create a balanced psychological contract that means that everybody ultimately knows what they're there to do, which is deliver successful business outcomes, because that is ultimately what everybody is there to do. But the lens that you use on that can be quite different depending on the audience that you're talking to. Cool. Thanks for the shares. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's talk about the next section then, which is thinking quite specifically about how you make this relatable. And so I've talked very generally there about this idea of how we really start to shift and anchor the narrative towards performance, but also how you can use a slightly different lens. And it's dead easy to say that conceptually, but if you want to be able to do that in a really meaningful way, then typically what we try to do is express culture in the context of that business need and priority. So whenever we're defining ideal culture and what we're trying to support a business in moving towards, there's 2 things that we're thinking about. So what we don't do when we're doing cultural audits and things is use standardized kind of models of saying you're this far away from this particular culture metric, etc. We work with organizations more to focus on, let's understand your operating context, goals and priorities, and let's design an ideal and a cultural standard that is right for unlocking the right behaviours for your context. And there are 2 core drivers that we're thinking about in this situation, which really drive this sense of relevance depending on the audience that we're talking to. So we have very clear conversations with the senior people about, what does this need to unlock? What does this organisation need to activate and unlock from a behavioural point of view in particular, but also thinking about mindsets and kind of how people prioritise to allow this business to succeed. So we have that conversation with the senior teams, even up into board, investors, etc., to really understand what is it that this business needs to deliver. And that's because there's been a shed load of research over the years to define kind of ideal culture models, but all of the meta-analyses that happen around that, so the big studies that pool lots of studies together, their general single conclusion is that there is no one single model that's helpful to evaluate against. Actually, operational and contextual alignment of ideal culture is more important than any single model. So we very much lean into that in our work. Let's understand the operating context, let's understand the operating goals, and let's understand the operating context, and from there really understand understand how people need to behave to deliver what we need to deliver, but in the soup that we're operating within. Because if we don't think about context, we're not considering the barriers that people need to overcome or the opportunities that they need to spot and lever to drive things forward. So that business driver piece, massively important. And for me, that also gives us the why should the business care about this and invest in it when the chips are down, when things are busy, when we've got limited resources and time. That's the thing that allows us to truly build the story with our senior team about why is this relevant, why is this not just about making people happy, and how is this going to deliver what we require. Because when we're talking about performance, we're not just saying the word performance anymore, we're saying the next 6 product launches that we've got, or our capacity to drive efficiencies while our government funding is being cut over the next 18 months, or dealing with more challenging customer needs and priorities because we're operating in a world where other support services are being stripped away from those people. So we're talking in the operational language of the organisation, excuse me, which allows us to really anchor to what is actually important to those people on a day-by-day basis. So the business drivers are critical. They give us the language, they give us the story, but they also give us the reality check of what the business is willing to or can pragmatically offer and provide when it comes to an ideal culture and experience for people. So once we understand that, what we then do is have broader conversations with the business, with colleagues, etc., to talk about this piece of talent drivers. So if we know that this is the kind of the non-negotiable, this is what we need to do around here to deliver what we're set up to deliver, we then soften that conversation by saying to colleagues, well, if you've got to do this, what do you need? What do you need from each other? What do you need from the organisation? What do you need from your managers and leaders to allow you to be able to show up and do that on a day-to-day basis? So the employee experience element is very important, because we want to think about how we can drive high performance through thriving, but we're doing it in a way that has this container of in service to these sets of behaviours, priorities and kind of mindsets that we need to be able to deliver the business goals. And what that allows us to do is create a much more realistic and relatable set of standards and priorities in terms of our change. And it allows us to have those much more pragmatic conversations about things. If we focus purely on what colleagues say they want, and I think a lot of culture work build standards out of pure colleague consultation of the question of how do we make it better around here, what we end up doing is getting stuck in that sentiment trap where we're stuck in the kind of you said we did about things. We're asking people to say what are the few things that'll make things better for you around here, but they aren't always using the frame of reference of, well, this will make me more, they're kind of stopping at the, well, this will just make me feel better, or this will feel nicer, rather than thinking about how does this make me more enabled and more able to deliver what's required for the organisation. So while the bottom-up iteration is helpful, we've got to make sure that we do it in a frame so anything that we're bringing back to the organisation feels anchored in its pragmatic needs and priorities, and also then it feels contained so that we're not doing a consultation that raises a load of unexpected or undeliverable expectations because I've said it and I've fed it back and you still haven't done it. We're creating that cap of reality check that allows that stuff to be filtered through. So again, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Sometimes I think this is a bit different from the normal kind of rhetoric on this in terms of let's just do this all with colleagues and build it. What's your thoughts? Am I being fair to kind of some of the limitations of that approach, or do you have any other thoughts or observations? I'll take any comments. Anybody want to chat to me or pop anything in the chat? I'll totally take it. Everybody to the point of stunned silence, have I? That's always my favourite in this process. Okay, I hope.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute my mic.
Oh, fair enough.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, this is kind of perfect for what we're talking about at the minute, but I think what's difficult is when you've always used that sentiment and asked people how it can be better, is how we actually change that internally. So how we change that question so that people aren't like, well, you're not making it better. You know, it's not just about more biscuits, more snacks, you know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's how we change that internally, I think, that we're trying to discuss at the minute.
And I think, honestly, for me, it's just about starting a slightly different conversation. So, you know, as you're starting to pepper different conversations into the listening groups and things that you're doing, revamp. So often where we get people to start when they're trying to shift that psychological contract from parent to child, if we tell you and you fix it, into that more adult to adult, we're all responsible for making this happen. And how do we work together? There might be some stuff that that you only you can do, and we can, and as colleagues we can hold you to account and expect you to do that, but there's also stuff that we can be doing. I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of my career in listening circles thinking, but you could fix that. But that, you know, that's not an organizational problem. That's a how we work together on a local level problem. And I think you've just got to start nudging and shifting the conversation on that. We do have some stuff that through our course, etc., that gives packs around that focus group and the like, Laura. So I'll share details with that if you're trying to explore that a bit more. I could take you down a rabbit hole on that today, but I'll not do it at the minute. But happy to follow up if that's useful on things.
Thank you.
And Patty, I love your point about how it can be hard to get employees excited about the business goals. You know, I think you're absolutely right. I think the storytelling with colleagues is more about this piece about how do we create your experience in delivering those business goals in a way that feels good for you. So while it's not about, for me, that kind of unwavering happiness at all cost of employees, which I think creates that really unhelpful parent beloved child dynamic, I think saying we care about you having the tools, you know, being happy, healthy and connected enough to do what you need to on a day-to-day basis, then that can allow it. So that framing of helping work feel and flow better really connects to that. Well, it'll feel nicer around here, it'll feel easier, or I can have the opportunity to feel prouder. I think that can be helpful. Or looking for the frame that the culture creates. So if, for example, we've been working with an organisation that's going from that very cosy, we look after you, into a more high performance growth focus, and the narrative there was what's in it for us is about stretch, professional progression, professional reach, stretch, helping you learn new things, etc. So I think it's about finding the hook for colleagues in that situation, but you just need to have both hooks. The performance hooks are for the boardroom, I'd suggest, and the senior manager, and the experience hooks are for colleagues. But by having the conversation about both, you are building a model and a definition of ideal culture and a goal for ideal culture that has both in there, which makes it much easier to drive that storytelling forward in a meaningful way. Sarah, I'm just reading your point on this. Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, and I think you're right. You know, you've got to do the, I would suggest that if you do both pieces of the consultation, but the expectation is that you're going to meld those things together to create the picture of the ideal model, and then use that to circulate to the business is helpful. So totally understand that. My speed of reading isn't helpful for this, is it? Let's see. Good question, Marguerite. Honestly, I think it comes down to ultimately behaviour change for me. So sorry, I'll read out the question so everybody else doesn't have to read it. That question about whether if leaderships get that sticky middle, leadership get the recognise the need for the benefit, colleagues want it as well, but some managers want business as usual. Well, so for me, behaviour change is about three core things, really. One is about being really clear on the standard and what the expectation is. Culture and behaviour change boils down to, are we clear on the standard? Are we giving people the capability, which is the skills and the opportunity to be different? And are we holding people accountable for this? So if your leadership team recognise the benefit and they want it to happen, if they want that sticky middle layer to move, the only people who can do that is them. So upskilling and supporting them to be able to do that work around standard setting, you know, supporting around coaching, etc., and really driving that sense of accountability. That's the only way that'll move. If there is no accountability, there is no change. And I think a lot of the time leaders will go, yeah, we'd love that of their culture. Can you go and do it for us? And a big bit of our work has got to be, well, we can do these bits, but actually this is your business and this is about how you run your business. So let's have a conversation about how you can set and implement those new standards moving forward. So I think sometimes we've got to have a little bit of a personal revolution to say, I'm not going to just bridge the gaps and try and make this happen. I'm not going to go and do another training course or another bit of engagement with managers. I'm going to focus my time and attention on my leaders to help them have the capability and kind of motivation to manage this through the line, because, you know, that I hate old sayings on this, but what gets managed gets done. That's the truth of it. And culture is exactly the same. The behavioural standards on this are critical, and we've got to see our role as building capability in the organisation for the leader, the leadership roots to run and deliver that culture. If we see ourselves as delivering the culture change, we're stuffed, because we can never create that ultimate sense of accountability. Okay, so let's talk about how we can start to bring some of this to life. So once we've started to define our ideal culture, we can then really start to bring this to life in a useful, in a way that can benefit those different lenses that we've talked about. And I think, to Patty's point earlier, there is we need to think about different lenses and different stories that we want to drive this through. And again, a lot of the time, I think one of the challenges that we have with more traditional approaches to culture change is we do the first piece really well. Often we'll define values. I'm a bit allergic to values, but I just think it's because they've been used poorly a lot of the time in the past. And I'm a bit more tolerant when they get done in this way, to be honest. But I prefer creating some sort of deal sheet or psychological contract, because I just think it's a bit more nuanced and partnership based. But we'll do that on another masterclass another day. I promise not to get on my high horse about that. But if you are using values or a deal, whatever it may be that feels right for your context, I think a lot of the time we start at that point of in values, but recognizing that actually our values are an expression of intent. And I think a lot of people try and launch change off values. This is how we are around here, but they're quite high level, and then they don't catch traction. And then you call in somebody like me to build you a behavioural framework, and we go, oh yeah, no problem, we'll define all the behaviours. And we do that, and then we stop, and the behaviour framework never quite takes off, or people just do their performance management in the way that they always have. And the intention of how do we drive this through to integrate it never really happens. If we want the story to round out, we're just thinking here about how do we kind of bring it through those 4 circles that we talked about earlier. Being able to articulate this around the ideal experiences as we see them for the individual, for a colleague, builds that true, relatable, tangible story. So how will it feel different around here for me if I live that particular value or behavioural priority, whatever it may be? What will it actually look like? And also, what does that mean in terms of the business results? So you can see with these final 2 boxes, I'm focusing very much on that. Well, so what? What does this actually mean? Either for me as an individual, or for us as people who are leading or responsible for the outputs within this business. And some individuals, you know, I'm the original corporate drone on these sorts of things. Every organisation that I've worked for, I'm like so in for what that needs to deliver and what's required. With the queen of over engagement probably on things. So some colleagues will really connect to this idea of, oh, do you know what? If we could get that thing out quicker, if we could do more of those projects, etc., then that would really be, you know, that would be really brilliant, because for me it's about delivering tasks and delivering outcomes, etc. For other colleagues, they'll be a bit softer around stuff, and they may want that experience piece will feel more important to them, and both of those are fine. But all I'm saying here, make sure you round out your story. Don't just say these are the principles, this is what we expect, and this is what we want you to do around here. And if that doesn't work, then say, look, these are the behaviours that we're going to hold you to account to, particularly if you haven't got that system to drive that clarity of, I suppose what that does is the first part of behaviour change, the behaviour change trio. It gives the standard, but it doesn't support the building of capability, and it doesn't drive accountability. So think about the behaviour piece, how you round that out in your implementation, but also finish the story to make sure that it's anchored to all of the different elements. What's your thoughts when you look at that? Does that start to bring it to life a little bit for you? Any thoughts, observations, comments? Enough. Shall we talk about making it clear then? Okay, so final element. So this element of thinking about how we really make it clear, what I mean by this is once we've caught people's attention on culture, I think the other big barrier that we get around fluffiness in particular is, but what the hell do we actually do around this? It sounded like a cry for help from my deep part of my soul, didn't it? I've been in those rooms a lot. But I think, again, often, particularly I think whenever we do that kind of colleague listening version of the cultural audit and standard setting, we end up with all of these disparate actions, some of which don't actually feel within our gift to be able to drive anyway, because they are localized or they're leadership driven, and we're stuck with the information as HR leads in terms of driving things forward. Or some of it is so mindset based, and it's like, well, how do we actually conjure this out of the ether? How do we make people feel and think differently about this stuff? So I just wanted to share some practical tools that we use to support this, to really make our problem solving and our action planning around this kind of gap analysis and priority setting much easier. So the first thing I'm going to share with you is this. This is genuinely, if my husband does what I ask him to, they'll put this on my headstone, because this feels like the greatest piece of work I've ever done in my life. If you think it's rubbish, that's fine. I'll just tell me and I'll motivate me to make it better, because it's better than anything else I've done. But this is a bit of this is a culture driver map that that we created by going back through 51 different cultural audits that that I'd done through my career, or I'd had access to in terms of reviewing other things that people had done, to answer the problem that I think in a lot of culture situations we end up in, which is we can describe the current culture perfectly. We can talk about the behaviours that we see, the impact that that's having, etc. We know exactly how it links to whatever model. We know we're a clan culture or whatever it may be, because all of the research has been around that. But whenever we get that description and everybody identifies with it and fervently agrees that it needs to be different, that description doesn't actually tell us why that thing is happening or what we need to change in order to shift that. And what happens is we end up in these circular discussions where we know from our professional judgment that there's probably something about leadership tone that's going on, and we try to have the conversation with our leadership team, but then they go, actually, but do you see what they're doing over there? I know you say you want me to empower them, but when I do empower them, they don't pick it up, they give it back to me anyway. And you end up in these real circular conversations where everything is flowing and shifting. So I built this for two reasons. One, there was no model for what actually drives culture and what influences that, no evidence-based model on that. So we went and we built one. But the other piece was I was really bored of having really good evidence about what was driving situations, and finding myself caught in these smoky conversations where we're going round and round of, it's not me, it's you, but what's happening around this? So this is a RAG rating system that allows you to be able to have a look across whatever issues that you've got and basically look at the different factors that are influencing that. So I don't know, let's take something like you can do this as an overall cultural alignment evaluation, but we also do it in action planning, where once we've set the priorities of what needs to shift moving forward, because we know what we want the culture to be and we know what it looks like, we'll then go back and say let's go with personal responsibility, because I'm always obsessed with that one. How do we drive increased personal responsibility? How do we get people to act with more personal responsibility? Stop escalating things, stop getting derailed by the smallest setback, etc. What you can then do is have a look at the evidence that you've got through your audit and look at your organisational system and say, well, what parts of this are in service, are helping us to get to a point where we're giving people the power and giving them the confidence to take that power, and what may not. And from that, if we do the RAG rating on it, we're ultimately then able to see what we need to influence. But we're not just talking about behaviour here. You can see that I'm sure there will be stuff on role modelling and leadership role modelling, but if you look at strategic planning, it may be that there's an issue about the fact that actually your business hasn't got a strategic plan, it's got a vision, and that's in the chief executive's head, and it's not detailed enough for the for colleagues to really understand what they're aiming for. They've got a general sense, but whenever something gets delegated to them, then it doesn't actually, they don't really know what the rules are or what they need to prioritise in complex situations. So there might be something about how we plan at a strategic level, how that cascades into our operational planning and priority setting that we need to look at. It might be about our delegated authority line. So while we tell people we want them to take responsibility for things, they might only be able to sign off 50 quid of budget and it's got to go up 3 levels, or they know the norm is that they've got to write a paper that goes to this committee or to this board, etc. So the system is actually reinforcing this idea that they can't make the choice themselves on things. So part of driving really great culture change that doesn't feel fluffy is about not just looking at, can you just be a bit more empowering, please, leadership team, because they'll go away going, oh, well, I am, and I don't really know what does that mean and what does that look like, and just demonstrate the behaviours that they always have. How do we look at our whole ecosystem and recognizing that there's a whole tub of soup here with different ingredients in there? And we may not choose the stickier ones of our really controlling chief executive who doesn't really want this anyway to start with. We might start in other places to release the pressure and show the value of those actions starting to build before we tackle that particular thing. So this starts to give us options, but much more tangible options for the actions that we're going to take moving forward. Does that make sense to people? See how that works? Yeah. And the other great thing about this is you can stick it up on a screen and you can sit down with the leadership team and you can talk about a particular issue and you can look at each of these factors individually and talk to people about it. Oh, thanks for the applause, Vicky. That's another vote, is it, for me putting it on my headstone? I'm taking that. It's going for it. Thank you. But yes, I think very much there's a piece here about how do we really get the whole range of potential things that we could do and build a much more pragmatic and clear set of options for how we move forward, rather than, I think our standard one is, we want you to behave differently, so can you just go away and behave differently, and maybe we'll give you a bit of training and coaching, but we're putting you back into a system that has the expectations, the nudges, the tolerances for all behaviour. So no matter how much out of system development we give people, as soon as we put them back into the old soup, they're going to taste the same, they're going to adopt the same flavour as the broth that they're sitting in. And then the other element that I would talk about here is just this piece around really being clear about whose roles are what. So I'm going to say I alluded to, I think I went on a bit of a tangent earlier talking to you about this, but really being clear about who's responsible for what. I think one of the ways that culture feels fluffy to leaders in particular is because they see it as something that happens under the bonnet of HR. So you go away and you build the comms and you do the development and you run the activation sessions and all of those things and reset the performance management system, all of which is massively critical and a really important part of culture change, but that does not change culture in our. We've got to be really clear in our action planning for our culture change of this is what we can do as support services and position ourselves as strategic partners who will support and enable the business to drive this change. But we've got to create very specific roles and responsibilities for our leadership that are around their role in localizing this. How do they make this feel real, make it matter, and make it safe for people to behave in a different way? Basically, the question is, how do we help them run the business differently? So what systems and processes are they reviewing? What barriers are they coming together to unlock? How are they demonstrating the behaviours that are required, but also coaching and facilitating those and permitting and encouraging those within their teams? Those are all very concrete questions that we need to help them answer. So our role is hugely valuable, but our focus should be less on how do we deliver this change and more about how do we build the capability in our leaders to be able to drive this change forward and own it themselves. Yeah. So there's loads in there, isn't there? There's loads. I'm sorry. There's loads. Louise, was that an accident? I think I saw a hand up, did I? It disappeared. I think so. Oh, cool. Okay, no problem. Thank you. So questions, comments about that? Any observations that anybody wants to make on things? Okay.
I think
oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Vicky.
Sorry,
yeah.
Paula. I think
You're
it's about following through, isn't it? Making the time to not just do the first bit or the second bit, but following it through to the third and fourth. And that consistency, I think.
Yeah. And I think that consistency around role, you know, it can get really
Yeah.
frustrating for us as you know, key agents of change. I think we get conditioned in our sorts of roles to bridge the gap because we've always been expected to do that. But
Yeah.
if we can really see that what we're doing then is enabling the system to limp along because we're not forcing the situation where others need to play the role that they need to, that piece around role definition is a real game changer, I find, on this stuff.
I think it's also getting distracted by other things that come through your office door.
Yes. Yes, fair point, very well made. Yes, very much so. Yeah. Well, look, we've talked about a lot today, so I just wanted to share with you that we've got a few different things on this. This is my absolute favourite topic on the world. We have a shed load of resources on our website if you want to dig into things a little bit more. So these are all free resources that there's some QR codes there for you that you can access that'll give you a bit more information about kind of a high level overview of how the scorecard works. It gives you access to our free tools that give you dip test evaluations of your current culture and the readiness of your organisation to shift, and the most ridiculous white paper on measuring culture, which if you want I would get now because our marketing team is trying to make us turn it into a paid report, and I'll do whatever they tell me to eventually. I'm fighting the good fight at the minute, but if you want it free, get it while you can. The other thing I would say is if this is an area that you were really interested in, as I mentioned, our digital course is launching today, and its launch price is only 300, not even 300 quid. And the first 10 people who sign up get a free thinking session with me or with Cara. If you prefer, if you decided that you couldn't handle an hour of me talking about this stuff, that's fine. Cara's much more measured, and some people prefer her style. I don't take that personally, but that is up and live on the website. So if you would like to access that, you can do. The focus of this course is very much about the fundamentals of culture change. We talk to you more in depth about this idea of what great culture is, give you information about the evidence base around that in terms of how it drives performance. We talk you through how to define ideal culture, give you some tools, just a couple of tools around kind of focus groups and things, and then bring you through the action planning level. It's not designed to be taking you all the way deep into all of our tools like the live course, but it is a really lovely kind of introduction. It'll certainly get you started, and probably a good way past that, really. It's only if you're a mega nerd on this stuff that you might want more than that. So yes, you know, more than welcome to go and play with that, see what you think. But similarly, if you've got any questions for me now, I'm really happy to take them.